Former Vice President Al Gore's breakthrough documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, brought the topic of climate change to the forefront. Not surprisingly, he is one of the sharpest critics of Mr. Trump's decision this week. We welcome him for what we believe is his first appearance on Fox News since the 2000 campaign. Mr. Vice President, good to have you back.
Great to be back, Chris. Thank you for inviting me.
Before we get to climate change, I want to ask you about this terrible attack in London. How do we stop these attacks on the West, and is President Trump's travel ban part of the answer?
Well, most of the attacks, both in England and here in the United States, have been by homegrown terrorists, and of course the courts will deal with the travel ban. They've already been struck down. We'll see what the Supreme Court does. This scourge of terrorism, we have to defeat it, but we have to defeat it not only with force of arms, but with the force of our values. And I truly believe that giving people around the world a sense that the world's got our act together and we're going to move forward to a bright future is one of the important tasks at hand.
Let's turn to the subject at hand. You met with President-elect Trump during the transition to discuss climate change, and afterwards you said this.
I had a lengthy and very productive session with the President-elect. It was a sincere search for areas of common ground.
You also talked with Mr. Trump, we're told, last month about staying in the Paris climate deal. Did you misjudge the President?
Well, I've kept my communications with him confidential. I think that's the right way to handle it, but none of it would surprise you. I did my best to persuade him it was in our country's best interest to stay in the Paris Agreement. I thought there was a chance that he would do that. I'm sorry that he made the other decision.
How do you explain it?
Well, you'd have to ask him for the explanation. It makes no sense to me. I think that it was a reckless decision, an indefensible decision. I think it undermines our nation's standing in the world and isolates us and threatens to harm humanity's ability to solve this crisis in time. But make no mistake about it, this country is going to continue to solve the climate crisis. Governors like Jerry Brown and Andrew Cuomo, Jay Inslee, many others, mayors, Mike Bloomberg's doing a great job rallying mayors around the country. We are going to continue reducing emissions. Atlanta just decided to go 100% renewable, and there are many, many others.
Let's talk, and you heard me challenge Scott Pruitt. I'm going to challenge you. Let's talk about some of the concerns that people have about Paris. President Trump talked about one.
It includes yet another scheme to redistribute wealth out of the United States through the so-called Green Climate Fund. Nice name.
Under the Paris Accord, 37 developed countries agreed to provide $100 billion to developing countries. Why is that fair?
Well, you know, when the Marshall Plan was launched by the United States after World War II, it ended up benefiting us tremendously, as well as making the world a better place. We would be 11th on the list of nations per capita in helping the country to meet this climate challenge. And by the way, one of the opportunities for us is to export our products and create more jobs here. You showed some jobs in the solar industry earlier. Solar jobs are now growing 17 times faster than other jobs. It's the brightest spot. If we get out there in the economy, if we get out there and help to lead this sustainability revolution, it benefits our economy.
But here's the problem I think a lot of people have. Countries like the U.S., which have been developing an industrial economy since the 19th century, the argument is that somehow we owe something to countries that didn't.
Well, it's a global challenge, and the world community as a whole has to face up to it. This administration has said there's no such thing as a global community. Actually, there is, because we, as a civilization, are putting 110 million tons of heat-trapping global warming pollution up into the sky every day as if it's an open sewer. You know, the climate crisis is real, Chris. I'm sure you know that. President Trump won't say whether he believes it's real or not, but it is real. And you don't have to rely on the virtually unanimous opinion of the scientific community anymore. Mother Nature is telling us. Every night on the TV news now is like a nature hike through the book of Revelation. People are noticing this, these downpours and historic floods. We've had 11 once-in-a-thousand-year downpours in the U.S. just in the last 10 years. We've got these wildfires that become mega fires now. We've got 70% of Florida's in drought today. Missouri declared an emergency just a couple of days ago because of another one of these, and they keep on coming.
But let me pick up on that, because let's say that we agree, and you know a lot of people don't, some people don't, some people that watch Fox News don't. Even if you believe in greenhouse gas and climate change, there's some questions about how effective the Paris Accord is in dealing with it. Here's what EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt said on Friday about the effectiveness of the U.S. target, which is to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by a quarter under 2005 levels. Here he is.
Paris, it's set targets of 26 to 28%. With the entire agenda of the previous administration, we still fell 40% short of those targets. It was a failed deal to begin with.
You would agree that even if all 195 nations, not 194, met their targets, it still wouldn't solve the problem.
That is correct. However, it sends a very powerful signal to business and industry and civil society and countries around the world. And since the Paris Agreement was reached, look at what has happened. You talked about China earlier. China has now reduced its emissions 4 years in a row. It's reduced its coal burning 3 years in a row. India is now in the midst of a massive shift from coal to solar. Unbelievably, India just announced 2 weeks ago that within 13 years, 100% of their automobiles are going to have to be electric vehicles. We're seeing this in this country as well. I went to one of the most conservative Republican cities in America, Georgetown, Texas, in an oil state. They have just completed the transition to 100% renewable energy.
That's part of the argument, Mr. Vice President, and it's a philosophical argument. Do you need government regulation, or will the economy, will the market work? And we took the case of solar, which is now double, pretty astonishing.
Yeah.
Well, actually, we've got some stats here, so we'll do it. Greenhouse gas emissions already declined 12% below 2005 levels. Between 2004 and 2015, investment in clean energy rose from $10 billion to $56 billion, and as we point out now, twice as many jobs in solar as in coal. Isn't the country, isn't the world going green on its own? Does it need this government, this international regulation?
The answer is yes and yes. We're in the midst of a sustainability revolution that has the magnitude of the Industrial Revolution, but the speed of the digital revolution. But yes, we still need good policies because we have to move faster. We're in a race against time here. We're seeing very encouraging changes, but we have to change faster. The late economist Rudy Dornbush, I'm sure you knew him, he once said, things take longer to happen than you think they will, and then they happen much faster than you thought they could. And the Paris Agreement was a successful effort to send the signal, this train is leaving the station, everybody on board. The U.S. should be on board. States and cities and businesses and civil society leaders are on board. If we had the president on board and good policy, we could move even faster.
I fact-checked Mr. Pruitt. I'm going to fact-check you.
Okay.
After your movie An Inconvenient Truth came out in 2006, you made the following comments as part of your publicity for the movie. You said, unless we took, quote, drastic measures, the world would reach a point of no return within 10 years, and you called it a true planetary emergency. We're 11 years later. Weren't you wrong?
Well, we have seen a decline in emissions for the on a global basis. For the first time, they've stabilized and started to decline. So some of the responses of the last 10 years have helped. But unfortunately and regrettably, a lot of serious damage has been done. Greenland, for example, is losing 1 cubic kilometer of ice every single day. I went down to Miami and saw fish from the ocean swimming in the streets on a sunny day. The same thing was true in Honolulu just 2 days ago, just from high tides because of the sea level rise now. We are going to suffer some of these consequences, but we can limit and avoid the most catastrophic consequences if we accelerate the pace of change that's now beginning.
Mr. Vice President, we should point out you have a sequel coming up called An Inconvenient Sequel in July, and I understand that you're going to have to rewrite the ending because of the decision the President was just made.
The directors, Bonnie Cohen and John Schenck, are putting a new segment at the very end of the movie, and I think that's appropriate.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Let's not wait another 17 years.
Deal.
Okay.